We have one item on our agenda tonight, and that is to discuss the police department use of force policies. We're going to be having a presentation from our Chief of Police, Janine Roberts, and I believe we're going to start with a message from our mayor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this on? There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight's agenda includes a review of the Westbrook Police Department's use of force policy. I asked to refer this item to the committee in response to the killing of George Floyd and many other black lives by members of police departments across the United States who violated their sacred oath to protect and serve the public. The time is right for a review of use of force policies throughout our nation, and as community leaders, we need to look within our own house to ensure that we continue to hold ourselves to the highest possible standards. Here in Westbrook, our police department is unique in its fundamental commitment to community engagement and community policing efforts. Examples of this commitment include our civilian employees who staff the community policing substation on Brown Street, which facilitates connections within a vulnerable population, and our recovery liaison position, which connects people with substance use disorders to critical services. In addition to the police department's core values include professionalism, compassion, accountability, integrity, fairness, and courage. Chief Janine Roberts has worked hard to establish this culture of integrity and transparency within her own department, and it inspires the rest of us in public service to follow suit. Tonight's review of the Westbrook Police Department's use of force policy provides an opportunity for the public to learn about policy development, the review process, and the levels of oversight we have in place. In addition, it provides an opportunity for community members to hold us as leaders accountable for policy decision. At a side benefit, the review sets the stage for a larger community conversation about maintaining transparency throughout all levels of government. The most important thing for us as elected officials to do this evening is to listen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief Roberts, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Councilor Morse and Mayor Foley, rest of the councilors, members of the public that are here. I apologize for my back being to you. And if you do have any questions as the conversation goes on, I definitely want to hear them, do my best to address them. If I don't have immediate answers this evening, we'll definitely come back and to get some with you. I also want to recognize that both Captains Lally and Goldberg are here with me this evening. Downstairs by the other microphone in case I anticipate that as the conversation and the presentation occurs, they will have some additional information to add to the conversation. As a general introduction, I do want to say that not only this particular policy, all of our department policies, if you recall as counselors back the end of 2019, start of 2020, you had approved some revenue funds to invest in hiring a professional law enforcement expertise company to review all of our policies to make sure that they were in best national practices and state and federal mandated requirements. So this process started long before May 25th, 2020 occurred, unfortunately, with the unfortunate death of Mr. Floyd. And this particular policy that we are discussing and presenting tonight is a proposed policy. So this is updating what we currently are operating under. So working on that strategic goal of bringing in all of those national best practices and mandated requirements, state and federal. Specific to that, throughout the policy, the Maine Criminal Justice Academy requires, their requirements are included. I do not know where those are, and the majority of the policy is really the nuts and bolts of what is required by society, by our law enforcement professionals, and it's also customized for the city of Westbrook, how we operate as a police department, how you, our community, are looking and are used to being served by the police department. And with that being said, a general introduction, the concepts behind a police officer's use of force is we all value the special integrity of every human life. And we use physical force to protect the public. We always, whenever possible and safe to do so, we're going to use de-escalation skills. And some key wording throughout the presentation, I will bold and highlight some key terminology and definitions to really drives home, at least for me, What I'm looking for when I'm, sorry about that, stepped away from the microphone. What I'm looking for when we train our officers on this policy, when we train them around using force, that reasonable and actually believes what the officer in the moment, with all that he or she has, to their observations, their awareness, their skills, their prior knowledge of the individual and the circumstances, that they reasonably and actually believe it's lawful and necessary and appropriate to use force to effect an arrest, to overcome resistance to an arrest, to defend them or another person from harm, effectively bring the incident under control, take somebody into protective custody, and accomplish some other lawful objective. Although the policy contains almost 25, 26 definitions, I specifically pulled out only a couple of them, germane for, in my mind, tonight's overview of the reasonableness, the objective reasonableness when officers have to use force. And one thing that I have learned throughout my years of law enforcement is no type of use of force is pretty. It's violent. It looks violent. It can feel violent when you're in the moment. So being realistic around the approach to training our officers and teaching them the definition of excessive force, something that is objectively unreasonable, unnecessary, or inappropriate, given the facts and circumstances known to the officer at the time the force was used. And that last phrase, the time the force was used, is key. We can sit here 5 minutes after the incident, 5 seconds after the incident, and say, hey, wait a minute, I saw X. Well, I'm Officer B, and I didn't see X. So I didn't know about X. So it's truly, and these are, again, national standards. This isn't a definition that Janine Roberts came up with. These are national model policy and language. So it's what's known to the officer at the time. The objectively reasonable. Again, the totality of the circumstances, without any other facts, the type of force a reasonable and prudent officer could have used in the same or substantially similar situation. The key word is could. I may not, so we could say could or would. Would means it's something that I would do. Doesn't mean that you would do it. It's could you do it. When you look at the totality of the circumstances, could an officer that is reasonably prudent with the facts that the officer was known to have at the time the force was used, could that have been the same type of response or similar situation? The individual actions, typically, as a profession, law enforcement primarily is reactive. Certainly we are proactive when we are out there trying to proactively engage our community and try to intercede and interdict crime. At the same time, when it's use of force, we're reactive. We are responding to somebody else's actions. And for our policy, we have 6 different individual actions that an officer would be assessing as to what type of action he or she should take in order to respond to the individual or the subject's actions. Compliant is cooperative. Passive resistive is limp, really not willing to do anything, and the officer is going to need to have to guide them. Active resistive, maybe tensing up their muscles, facial expressions, even verbal accosting. Active aggression is more of a physical resisting, pushing, pulling. The assaultive is more of a punching and attack type of thing. And then, of course, life-threatening is raising up that higher to a point where somebody's either potentially going to be seriously injured or killed. With the use of force options, the officer is going to assess the situation that's immediately confronting him or her. And they're looking at what's the severity of the crime or the incident, the suspected offense, or maybe it's an incident, because lots of times we end up having to use force in order to assist somebody that might be in a mental health crisis or might be suicidal. So it's not always just around enforcing the law and arresting somebody. It's protective custody as well. And what's the level of imminent threat to the officers or the public? What's the level of resistance that the subject is providing? Again, going back to those 6 action options from the subject on the slide before. What's the risk or apparent risk of escape? What's the subject's behavior? What are their individual actions? And the officer's perceptions and tactical considerations. And that last one is really individual to an officer in the sense that if I've got an officer that came out of the academy 6 months ago, and I've got Captain Lally, who's got 22 plus years experience and extensive training, I'm going to somewhat expect different knowledge and skill levels from those two different employees. So has to look at the individual officer, what the particular training that they have, and even in some ways life experience. Ultimately, whatever the officer witnesses, sees, absorbs through all their senses, is told by others, they're going to select the best option available, or options. It's not always just one particular option. And going to evaluate. That situation is always evolving. As soon as a person starts to de-escalate and is no longer resisting in any manner, then the officer's actions should de-escalate as well. And if for some reason the person escalates or becomes combative in a different way or resistive in a different way, then the officer adapts to that as well. So duty to intercede, this is something that has definitely come about in our country in the last month and a half, and is clearly outlined in our this new proposed policy. And it really requires that any officer observing another officer using force that is clearly beyond what is objectively reasonable under the circumstances, that officer shall intercede and prevent that use of unreasonable force. And if an officer does witness somebody that is exceeding the use of force that's permitted by the law, then that officer is going to be required to report those observations to a supervisor or a member of the command staff, member of the administration. While this particular wording is not in our current policy, we operate under the integrity as one of our main core values. I think actually all 6 of our core values would fit under the duty to intercede. So covering our training and proficiency, firearms, and our less lethal options. So less lethal options are other weapons that they're designed to be used when deadly force could be used, and it's just a safer, less lethal option. We have our pepper ball system. We have the impact shotguns, the beanbag shotguns, as we call them operationally. So for our firearms training, the Maine Criminal Justice Academy sets the standards for all of our training, and we routinely go above and beyond. With the support of the city and the council, we have incorporated the in-house training that we do 4 times a year, and a lot of that training is classroom policy, procedure things, as well as hands-on training around use of force, tactical safety, officer safety, defensive tactics, and things like that. So with our firearms, we qualify annually in June. We also do a familiarization qualification in shooting on the range, with including some nighttime shooting in November. During that November training, we also do the less lethal pepper ball and beanbag practices. We also do shotgun and rifle qualifications in June. The less lethal options we do every other year. And if for some reason an officer was not to qualify, so by the Academy standards, they have to qualify 2 successive times, back to back, in order to qualify with the Academy. And Captain Lally, can you help me out with what the actual standard is if they had to hit 50, if we shoot 50 rounds? It's 80%. Okay, 80%. So we need to hit 40 out of 50 rounds in the target itself. If an officer does not meet that qualification, then our firearms instructors will work with that officer to do some remedial training. That officer would be assigned modified duty. They'd be working in the police station, assisting with other duties. We're not going to put them on the street until they're qualified. If for some reason somebody doesn't meet a proficiency in one of the less lethal options, they're just prohibited from carrying or using and deploying any one of those other items, that less lethal weapons that they are not proficient in. Justified use of deadly force. Obviously, this is the biggest piece of our use of force. It's the right by our Constitution for law enforcement officers to take the life of somebody in defense of another, defense of themselves, and again, that reasonably believes is imminent use of unlawful deadly force, or to effect an arrest or escape. Again, the officer reasonably believes has committed a crime involving the use or threatened use of deadly force, using a dangerous weapon to attempt to escape or otherwise indicates that the person is likely seriously endanger human life or inflict serious bodily injury unless apprehended without delay, and the officer has made reasonable efforts to advise that person that that is a police officer attempting to detain them. And as I see serious, I meant to say when I started this that I finished this presentation about an hour before I started speaking this evening, so you're going to find some typos. That's the first one I saw. So the use of force options, these are outlined in our policy in much more detail than I'm going to go over in the next 2 to 3 minutes. The officer presence is just that, standing there in uniform or possibly in plain clothes with a badge present, identifying that we are police officers and we are there for whatever interaction we might be. Command presence is the verbal control of the situation, typically working to de-escalate a situation or to gain compliance from the individual. Control and compliance techniques and restraints are more what we call empty hands. It's an officer putting their hands on somebody to control them from pushing back, maybe off of a wall. It's really compliance techniques and what we call come-alongs, where you might be using pressure points, whereas an impact force is using possibly your forearm or your fist or your palm of your hand, your knee, something where you're actually impacting a strike. You're striking an individual to stop that. Typically, it's an it's an active resistance or active aggression. An impact force could also be our baton or the ASP, which is the expandable baton that the officers are issued. Our chemical agents is the OC spray that most officers carry on their person. The police canine, the conducted electrical weapon, we call it a taser, that's the brand name. In our policy, it's actually CEW for the acronym of conducted electrical weapon. The pepper ball projectiles, impact projectiles are the bean bags, as I said, and the deadly force. And for purposes of this evening, every one of these 10 particular officer response option guidelines, the key is guidelines. Nothing in this policy, actually, I should back up and say, the first paragraph or two in the policy talks about how this policy cannot possibly address every possible and potential situation and threat that an officer may be involved in or witness or do to assist somebody within the community. So these are guidelines that provide the officers with boundaries of when a particular type of option response to defend themselves, to gain control of a situation is available for them. And before I go on to the next slide, the one thing I also want to point out in regards to use of force, and I'll use the fact that when an officer uses force, it needs to be reasonable and proportional to what they're being presented with by resistance of the individual they're using force on. And inevitably, it cannot be equal. Equal does not mean control. I'll use the analogy of a motorist that is speeding, and an officer stopped on the side of the road. Somebody's doing 40 and a 25. In order for that officer to catch up and catch that motorist that is doing 15 over the speed limit, they have to go faster than 40 miles an hour in order to catch up to them. So when an officer is responding to somebody's resistance and somebody's threat, they are looking at being reasonable to that level that's proportional to stop that threat, to stop that aggression, to stop that resistance, to gain control of the situation. Towards the end of the policy, we talk about the medical response, basically EMS. Anytime medical aid is going to be asked for, anytime an officer or supervisor thinks it's appropriate or prudent, if requested by the subject that force was used on, if the subject complains of pain. And specific to this is a lot of times officers, especially when there's a physical struggle or confrontation, the handcuffs might go on a little tighter. So if a person complains that, hey, the handcuffs are too tight, that doesn't necessarily automatically require an EMS response. We're going to check those cuffs for fit and make sure they're double locked and they're not tightened up, and then continue on. But if it's anything else besides that, we are going to call for our rescue or take the individual to the hospital or ask for mutual aid from another community. If a subject complains that they can't breathe or they're obviously showing that they can't breathe, subjects that are not clear, that they don't fully recover after a use of force, and if they're showing signs of excited delirium, which is basically agitation, fear, panic, shouting, violence, hyperactivity, any cessation, quick cessation of struggle, respiratory arrest, we want to immediately get them in a situation where their airway is opened up and get medical attention as well. Continuing on, any use of deadly force or deployment of a firearm or one of the less lethal impact projectiles where the subject is struck with the weapon or the object. The key part is that second piece. Any chemical agent, OC spray or pepper ball, when the initial decontamination is not effective or the subject is showing signs of another medical condition. So typically when we have to decontaminate because of pepper spray or the PAVA powder, which is what is used in the pepper ball system, it's fresh air and it's water. And doing that for 10 to 15 minutes. If that is not calming the individual down, reseeding the burning sensation, then we're going to get medical people involved as well. Certainly every time if we had a police canine bite an individual, we're going to seek aid for that. Any baton strike in a sensitive area or resulting in injury or complaint, and any taser deployment or contact, especially if the subject is struck in those sensitive areas, the eyes, the head, genitals, female breasts, or another sensitive area. Use of force reporting, pretty much everything that if an officer, other than passive resistant, my hands behind my back, you can handcuff me. If an officer has to physically grab a hold of another person's body in some manner to use coercion, force, energy to move somebody's hands or their body to a position where they can be handcuffed or controlled, then the officer is documenting with a use of force report. And in that report, we have, I didn't actually put together a PowerPoint of the form itself, but in general, the form has got all the demographics of where, when, why, who, the description of the subject, height, weight, age, gender, race, and their actions. Were they known to be assaultive? Were they a threat to themselves? Were they armed with a weapon? And then we're always going to describe what the individual's actions were. What were the actions that prompted the officer to use force? And then what specific force the officers used to stop the resistance to gain that compliance from the individual. And the way I describe it to the officers is body part to body part. What if I had to use my right hip to push somebody, lean them up against the cruiser to gain control of them because they were pushing back, then I would want to be describing it as I used my right hip to push him or her against the hood of the cruiser and use my right arm to pull his right arm behind his back to handcuff him. There's a simple example. So use of force occurs. The officer's responsibility is to immediately notify the on-duty supervisor, and reminder that here in Westbrook, when we don't have a sergeant on duty, we have officers in charge, which is the most senior officer working on that particular shift. And of course, we always have command staff immediately available via phone or in person during business hours, and sometimes on the odd hours that we are working evenings and nights, to make sure that there is immediate supervisor review. And supervisors are going to respond to the scene when there's any use of deadly force, any use of a less lethal option, police canine, bite, force resulting in injury or complaint of injury, and at the end of any type of foot or vehicle pursuit or failure to stop for an incident, and any other time requested by an officer or deemed appropriate by a supervisor. Once the supervisor gets to the scene, they're responsible to make sure these various steps happen. Not that they have to do them themselves. They have to make sure that somebody within the police department is doing them that's not involved with the use of force. Like you would expect with any particular investigation, taking photographs and any video footage of the officers or subjects documenting any particular injury or lack thereof, as well as is there any damage involved to property. Identifying and obtaining written or oral statements from non-police witnesses, including the person that, or persons that force was used against. If the person happens to be in custody because they committed a crime or suspected of committed a crime, then the officer needs to advise them of their Miranda warnings. And If the subject receives medical treatment as a complaint of pain or an injury, then the supervisor's expected to attempt to get a medical release from the individual at the hospital to forward that to the operations captain. For the review process itself, the reports completed by the officer, policy says that they will complete them by the end of their shift that the force was used. We also have a sentence in there that at the approval of a supervisor or command staff level, not an officer in charge, we can extend that deadline to the next shift when appropriate. And so the supervisor that's on duty would go to the scene, if required, and then talk with the officers, review the reports. Those are sent to the operations captain, which is Captain Lally. He reviews not only that use of force report, he reviews the incident report, whether it's an arrest report or an offense report, a protective custody type of situation, as well as anything to do with the cruiser videos or any recording system. Maybe it's something that's out privately owned, and we have a copy of that particular video or that audio. So he's going to review all of that. And he's looking to confirm that the officer or officers are in policy and procedure, were there any training situations or concerns that might raise for this individual officer, or maybe it's an equipment piece that we should be training with everybody. And he reviews that, he signs it, and then it comes up to my desk for my level of review. And ultimately, all those reports are filed in the operations captain's office. For the command review findings, I briefly mentioned no further action to possible apparent policy violation and possible training, equipment issues, and recommendations. If there is a suspicion, belief, determination that there's an apparent or possible policy violation, then the captain's going to notify me of that. We're going to have a conversation. There'll be either an informal or a formal investigation that will look more deeply into the circumstances around that particular use of force. As the command staff review continues, we're really attempting to determine whether the force was, again, objectively reasonable under the circumstances. Going back to one of the first slides, the severity and seriousness of the crime or the suspected offense, the level of threat, resistance, the risk of fleeing or escaping, and whether the subject is posing an imminent threat to the officer or others. Additional factors: age, size relative to the officer, strength, number of subjects, number of officers, what's, again, that ability and skill of the officers and the available weapons, subject state of health and mental health, need of force and reasonableness between the need and the amount of force used, and the extent of injuries, whether that force was applied in good faith or to maintain and restore order. This administrative review is new to our policy. We currently do not operate under Administrative Review Board. This is one of those best practices that I mentioned earlier. So the concept is to have a 3-person review board that consists of somebody from the command staff, not the chief, a sergeant, which is a supervisor, and a patrol officer. And that the board review any incidents referred by the chief of police and reviewing all of those pieces I just talked about that become part of the investigation for the supervisor's review. And we're assessing the officer's actions, response, and tactics, any training needs, that same rundown. And the scope of the review will really include the role of the involved officers, the witnessing officers, the supervisory and command officers, including actions at the scene in their reporting review of the incident. So not only are we looking at what did the officer do in the moment, and was that objectively reasonable, what's the rest of our procedure and policy and practice look like? Are we doing things effectively and right in the administrative steps to make sure that we are serving our community and to the highest level with the best training and practices in place? Ultimately, the board returned their findings in writing to the chief of police, and again, the same types of findings and actions may include those 4 listed there. That is a quick down and dirty summary of the 25-page use of force report that is currently proposed for the Westbrook Police Department. I want to actually give an opportunity for either Captain Lally or Captain Goldberg. Is there anything that I missed that you think is important for the council and the public to know, gentlemen? All right. Actually, Councilor Morse, I believe you had sent, was it you that sent me the email earlier today? I'm sorry, Councilor Shaughnessy. So Councilor Shaughnessy had sent an email earlier today with questions around that review process, and if somebody files a complaint or excessive force was deemed to be used, what does that process look like? Who investigates it, and what's the accountability to the citizen involved and to the community at large? So first of all, I will proudly say I have not investigated a complaint for excessive force. Definitely in 5 years, and I don't remember. I will go by my experience of other citizens' complaints when they're not happy with my ultimate answer. So with any citizen complaint, it's going to come in. I will get the information from the citizen filing the complaint. Typically, we'll meet with the captain or both captains. They'll do an initial review of what the circumstances are, because inevitably 99, if not all, of the contact is going to be documented in some way. Should there be an actual internal investigation based on a complaint, typically that's going to be Captain Lally, provided he's not involved in the incident itself. If not, go to Captain Goldberg. And we've also in the past, again, for different types of citizen complaints, used mutual aid, used a command staff member from a different local community, so that we have the better practice of transparency and, what's the word I'm looking for, balance, and that's not internal, so to speak. So ultimately, we do the investigation, say it comes out that we determine there's no violation of policy, the citizen's not happy. Well, I imagine that Mr. Bryant and Mayor Foley can tell you that the citizens have no problem going up above my head and saying we're not happy with the chief's decision, the chief's answer. And I liberally use Attorney Burns and her team to make sure that we are serving the community accurately, professionally, and correctly. And if we are making mistakes, if I'm making mistakes, that I'm catching them before they become any liability to the city. And I will say that in my few years here with the city, we have handled a few notice of claims that did not turn into anything besides notice of claims, but they always have the civil opportunity to go through the legal system on the civil side to file a lawsuit or a notice of claim to try to get their concerns issued and addressed. We have also worked in the past, again, not related to use of force, but other citizens' concerns with the Attorney General's office in order for them to do an external investigation and overview of what we have conducted for whatever investigation or review. And ultimately, some of the more, to me, they're more routine complaints where a citizen is complaining that an officer was rude or an officer swore at them. Well, the advantage of having our in-cruiser videos is many times those, to me, they're that independent witness. They're going to show you exactly what was said. Not necessarily what was seen, depending on if you're right in front of the camera. However, I have had more than one occasion, actually multiple, where I've said, ma'am or sir, would you like to come into my office and watch the video? This is, I am assessing what my officers said or didn't say, did or didn't do in a sterile environment without emotions attached to whatever that contact was or is that you had with the contact there. And in my determination, there was a minor violation, there was a major violation, there was no violation, and I welcome an opportunity to come in and watch the video with me, and somebody, your representative or anything like that. So that's the way we typically practice, is doing it in-house, knowing that both Captain Lally and I, and Captain Goldberg, have you been to the Maine Criminal Justice Chiefs training? Okay. So the Maine Criminal Justice Academy, as part of their standards, have a week-long course, typically every spring, for new chiefs and command staff level. And it's a week-long course that covers all kinds of different pieces of being a new chief. And one of those is a significant piece about internal investigations in any basis, not just use of force. And I actually have that in many other reference books that I use quite frequently to make sure, because luckily we do not deal with these on any type of regular basis, that I'm not well experienced to know off the top of my head that I need to do 3, 4, and 5, and I can skip 7. That, I think I answered all of your questions on that particular email. Did I miss any, Councilor?
Yeah, I think so. And it was nothing directed particularly at the department, but just in light of everything, there is sort of the issues of use of force and the issues of how that's responded to by whatever entity. And so I appreciate what you had just told us. And I think that's important because that's what gives that sense, the sense of accountability is what gives faith in the department from the position of somebody that's in the public that just, doesn't know you like that we do, so.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Any councilors have any questions?
Actually have several questions, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
And I would love to start with the one that, let me say this first. Thank you, Chief Janine, for your presentation. Since the killing of George Floyd, as I've said several times, this really has changed our lives as Black people. And we've seen something we have never seen actually happening on a television. We saw that in the way he was treated. And as I was reading the materials, one of the things that struck me, said there is no way somebody who's unarmed should actually they shouldn't use really a force unless that person is resisting. And we have seen that several times on a television now, not even after the killing of George Floyd. It happened in Atlanta when I saw somebody who was actually laying in his car and he got shot when he was actually having dialogue. So that really prompted us to think about what happened behind the scene when we can't see that on television, we can't see that on a camera. And I want to just mention that this is nothing to do with the Westbrook police, just I'm talking about in general. And the reason why of this dialogue which the country is engaged in right now is actually to be able to work with the police, not necessarily to be afraid of the police, because my color of the skin is an issue to a police. We need to be able to move that away from it. So one of the questions that he asked, my colleague asked, that I wanted to ask, when I looked into the review of that was my last question, the administrative review, which is on page 24 on your presentation, it says every recommendation should go to the chief police. I wondered if really for the transparency, is it okay if that can go beyond just the chief police to include some of the community leaders so that they know what's happening? Nothing, the chief police is not hiding anything, but we want to make sure that really what happened on the scene was transparent and also the use of force was necessary or not necessarily to get to a point where somebody will be shot. So that's a question that I was asking as we look into these things, is it possible? And the second question that I really want to also stress on this issue, throughout this presentation, which I also read, you mentioned several times the law, by law, by law. Everything that is law does not necessarily mean that it's easy and everybody can go in and do something because he's protected by law. I think that's where we need mostly to focus on. What is accepted by law? And how can we really go beyond that and say this law has been enacted in a way that probably satisfied some people against others? So that is, everything which is law does not always mean it's a necessity or is necessary. So I want us to look into that as well. And then the third piece that I saw on this recommendation, also on the presentation, it looks like we leave up to the police to make a judgment, personal judgment, based on what's about the scene, what's happening on the scene. And when we leave that to the judgment of the police can always make his or her own judgment and say, I was threatened, it was really bad. How do we define that? So this discussion we are having is so sensitive that some people might feel like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? We know we have a confidence in you, Janine, but what we need is actually build a more relationship, transparency in a system, and then look at the policies that you're using, whether they're favoring some people against others. And my last question to you will be, would you be able to release the data for us that shows the number of the discrepancy that I read on Portland Press Herald, the number of black people being arrested in Westbrook in comparison to the other people? So I would be happy to look into that, and if possible, what are the reasons, the most reasons behind those arrests? Thank you.
So I want to make sure, I think you just asked 4 questions,
Yes.
and I want to make sure I get them right. The first one is around providing information on the use of deadly force, and the transparency around that. Actually, can you repeat your first one?
So the first one is, actually, I'm going to rephrase that even better. I'm glad you asked the question. Because the supervision, that the administrative issue that you asked, you mentioned, that's my fellow counselor did ask. I was wondering if it's possible that we extend the review by not only the chief of police, but if it's possible to include other people who can be able to review and to check that deadly use of force. And actually, one other question that I forget to mention is, when a supervisor is the one on a duty, as we saw with George Floyd, those around him couldn't do anything because the supervisor is the one who was kneeling down on the George Floyd. So they were unable to intervene and say, you can stop. So what happened in that case if the supervisor is the one that is actually in that situation?
Okay. So I'm going to try to get them all. Repeating the first one around transparency, extended review are you saying every use of force or deadly use of force? Extending beyond the internal police department to the public. I would refer to my colleague Attorney Burns as to what's going to be confidential and what's not, what's public information. Also, the other dynamic in our state of Maine, anytime an officer uses deadly force, whether that's with a firearm or with any other part, a weapon or a body, and causes seriously bodily injury or death, that's investigated by the Attorney General's office. That's completely out of the hands of any local police department, including Portland and Bangor, who investigate their own homicides when a homicide occurs, citizen to community member to community member. So yes is the answer, figuring out, navigating what's public information and what needs to remain confidential. I think that's very doable. The second question, I think, was similar to that, was it still around transparency in use of force. One of the reports that is part of the policy is at the end of each calendar year, we have currently it's Sergeant Brian Olson, Sergeant Olson, who is our lead firearms instructor as well as our lead field training supervisor, has taken the responsibility over from retired former Sergeant Champy to go through all of the use of force from the previous year and pull together a data collection, de-identifying the individuals, but coming up with the types of incidences, the types of resistance presented, the types of force used, gender, to I think there's even age as well as race, certainly, and the number of which officers, how many times in a particular given month. So that is public information. We can certainly share that information. To your last question that you brought up around the Portland Press Herald and what they're reporting, I didn't read that article, so I'm going to have to get educated. And certainly whatever we have for arrest data, we will provide. The supervisor using force and the responsibility to intercede, it goes beyond rank. It goes beyond that paramilitary structure in our profession and in our organization. If I was using excessive force, then the responsibility would be on that newest officer that I hired to stop me. So The operational answer to that last question, Counselor, is rank does not matter. If the individual clearly is witnessing something that they believe to be unreasonable, objectively unreasonable, and excessive, then they have a duty to intercede. And not only do they stop what's happening, they also shall, again, the policy said shall, report it to a supervisor, command level staff member. And there was another one, the way I jotted it down was police judge and police system transparency, and I'm not sure, I know I didn't get the context of your middle question. Do you remember what it was?
I think one of the questions that you did not answer is, we leave everything up to the police to use their own perception and the judgment.
Okay.
So how do we know that this judgment was fair? Because I can come and tell you whatever I want and however I feel, and you, whether you believe it or not, that's how the law describes. It's up to the officers. How can we, it's hard to quantify that or even to figure out the legality of that, whether that person is fair or not.
So a couple of thoughts that I have to that question is that when you talk about laws, throughout the history of our country, there are court cases that are decided by the Supreme Court, and even the federal Supreme Court as well as the state. Those particular cases set procedure for officers, whether it's around use of force, to arrest, to search and seizure. Although I didn't touch base on them as part of the policy, it lists which particular crimes the officers, the elements of the crimes the officers need to be familiar and knowledgeable with. They also cite cases like Graham v. O'Connor. It's just the one off the top of my head. So these are real-world cases that have changed the way we police and use force in our society. For purposes of how do we say to you, the citizen, that our review is accurate, it's fair, that's in the system that we set up. One thing that I have lived this myself as a professional police officer, many citizens do not have any problem telling me how to do my job when they have no training at all. I just went to the dentist last Tuesday for a root canal. I wasn't trying to tell my dentist how to drill my teeth. So the transparency, the relationship building, the education, the openness to that community engagement, and to educate each other is where I think you find that transparency. As I have lived in my previous career in Portland, having untrained community members assessing officers' actions is not effective. Now, trained is a whole different dynamic. And what does that look like? So a big piece of it, and it kind of comes down to that, trust me, counselor? And we have that trust. At the same time, trust can be broken in an instant with anybody's emotions or anybody's facts. So this is an area I've said to my staff in the last month and a half, a few times, and I might have said it to some of you, that when I anecdotally look at the Westbrook Police Department, I give us a grade of an A to a B+. To me, that's a 95 to a 90. So we do a lot of things really, really well. And then there's some areas that we need to be better at. And that 5 or 10%, to me, comes down to the transparency, the engagement, and the data collection. You know, the piece is that you only, I think somebody from the analysis side of things, garbage in, garbage out. And we need to be better at making sure we're collecting all the information like a routine traffic stop. The fact that our officers make over 8,000 traffic stops a year. And last week, I actually got a request from a citizen that wants the last 5 years of all our traffic stops. And the detail that this particular individual wants means every traffic stop has to be looked at. They can't just run a quick query and say, here are your numbers. So, and even if we had all that information, we still couldn't run that quick query. So I'm owning that this is an area that we need to be better at, and looking for partnership with you, the city leaders, and our community members to figure out what does that look like going forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do any other counselors? Counselor Chow.
Yes, thank you. Chief, I would like to start off saying that You run an excellent department. I know you always say you have excellent department heads and excellent officers to help you make it run wonderful, but I think it starts with top down, and you have an excellent administration there, and you set example, and we are one of the best police departments in Maine, so thank you for all the hard work that you're doing. And I know that you guys work really hard, and this is not easy, this policy. I was watching the video that I think Detective Lally sent. It's called Caliber Press. And one of them was a police officer was minding his own business, sitting at a stoplight, got rear-ended by somebody. And the police officer's reaction was, oh my God, someone's hurt. So he's going to go out his door to go see if the other guy who rear-ended him was safe. It turns out that the guy that rear-ended him was running to the police car with a knife and was going to stab the police officer. The guy was sitting at the stoplight, minding his own business, and the police officer had to defend himself from the guy with a knife who ran into him. That was scary. It happened in a couple seconds, and it really didn't have much time. So having a manual of how to use, what to do in excessive force, it's good to have the manual, it's good to have the policy, but when you have a couple seconds to act, the manual, you want to do your best to remember what the manual said, but there's no time to go through, I forget how many pages this is. It's a pretty lengthy one. Your previous manual was 10 pages, I believe. So this one is a lot more comprehensive, and it tells about the policy. But one of the things that again, the three counselors now, one of my comments was the administrative review process. And you've already addressed this twice already, and now I'm going to bring it up a third time, where my comment was where you mentioned that the administrative review, you have your department, you have officers in your department reviewing the policies, and it gets sent to you. I kind of feel like your department's too small to have that. I forget how many exact members of the police force you have, but everybody knows each other. Hopefully they're all good working relationship and good friends and good coworkers. But in order to have what you're achieving, I think you need a bigger department to have more objectivity for that. And that's what was my concern of reading the thing. Also, I'm reading your manual. The first one was a lot shorter, but I liked how it just basically says B, 1A, 1B, 1C. It tells you like unarmed techniques. Verbal commands should be used. And then A, give notice. B, aid. And it's very easy to read. I can read this and say, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. When I read the second manual, I totally missed it. And I had to read it the second time to find the unarmed techniques. And I really don't think it was as clear as the first one, where and so your manual talks about justified use, but I believe this one has a more of a focus on how not to use it with the unarmed techniques. Even though this one does cover that material, I forget the outline format is very clear, and if I wanted to, I could just review this policy on page. It says 144 in mine. I'm sure it's a different number, but it's section B, unarmed techniques. It's very clear, and as a layman, I like clear and concise, and A, B, C, D. I understand that. This new manual is I think it's more complicated. And lastly, the old manual talks about situational use of force training. Sworn members of the department will be trained in lawful and proper applications for situational use of force. The level of frequency of training shall meet or exceed standards by the Maine Justice Academy and the Attorney General's office. And it talks about training and all this stuff. This new manual has mentions of trainings all over, but it doesn't talk about meeting or exceeding the standards of the Maine Justice Academy. And also, I was reading different articles about use of force, and former police officers are writing articles and blogs saying that training would help everybody. And you know, as a real estate broker, and I hate to compare my job to yours because it's not even close to, the dangers I face are minimal. But you know, when I wrote my first contract, I was shaking. My pen was, you know, I almost, you know, I sometimes forgot what these blanks were I was supposed to fill in, and it was scared. But you know, 18 years from now, it's old hat. I know what I'm doing. I'm not scared to write a contract anymore. It's pretty simple stuff. And the more training we can do, the more ready that your officers can get. And repeated trainings. You know, one blog talks about trainings a couple times a year, just to make sure that the situational force is when things happen quickly, and you want the muscle memory to react quickly for safety of your officers, for safety of the people, the new manual doesn't really talk about training as much, and the frequency of training and how often. And I know that you have Justice Academy standards that you use, but I would like to see it in here that, you know, when you're doing trainings and it's like, hey, Chief, the manual says we're supposed to meet twice a year. We've only met once. When's that second one? And you know, I could bug you about it, but if it's not in there, I can't bug you about it. So those are my comments in reading your policy. But thank you, and I appreciate the great job you guys are doing.
Have a couple of responses.
Yeah.
So the shorter version of the policy, it's shorter because all the use options, K9, impact projectiles, forget the rest of them, those are separate policies of themselves. So we actually, at one point, they're all included, then we took them out, and then we put them all back together. So that's one of the reasons why it's shorter. Your catch on that wording, it's actually, I think, the last page of the current 2018 policy around training standards. I caught that about 5:15 this evening, and just didn't get time to put it into that. One thing that is covered in the current proposed wording is, it's towards the front, I think it's within the first page, if not the first two pages, is a clear statement that annually officers will be trained and evaluated on understanding the policy. So I agree that the wording in the 2018 version is much more specific and direct and descriptive. The other thing, you talk about muscle memory and the fact that, as the saying goes, is your body cannot go where your mind has never been. So even if it's just having conversations, visualizing me being an officer sitting in my car thinking, well, what happens if I make this traffic stop and somebody starts jumping out of the car running? What am I going to do? To another layer of me talking with you as my peer saying, hey, if we made this traffic stop, what will we do? The training that we do in-house, Captain Lally and team of officers, various different officers, depending on what the particular topic is for the hands-on training, we've actually seen the officers in the last 6 years flourish from that and how they are responding safely to calls for service that are critical, that are high stress. And whether it's searching a building because there's somebody in there that might be armed or is known to be armed. I agree with you, we need more training, and as descriptive as the policy is, my goal is that 22-year-old officer to that 60-year-old officer and everywhere in between and all their life experiences, they, with training and explanation, can understand what's expected of them. So I thank you for those particular points that you using for descriptive. And the other thing I also want to say, as far as this particular policy as a draft, getting the council and the public's input this evening, continuing to refine this particular version, and then by contract it goes to the officers for a 10-day review. They can give input, they don't have to give input, I don't have to take their input. It's my practice as a leader to be inclusive anyway, as you know, because they have good ideas. They're the ones that are living this out on the street. They're the ones that are studying in different training courses as well as on their own, and what they're investing in their own professional growth. So I'm smart enough to know that adding in key wording, key descriptions, language that's going to help them better understand where their guidelines are, where their boundaries are, and what's expected of them. I'm all in.
Thank you.
Do any other counselors have any questions or comments? Any members of the public? Please come up to the microphone behind the chief or the one over there. Which one is that? Could you just tell us your name and where you live?
I don't live in Westbrook, is that okay? All right, thank you. My name is Regina Phillips. I live at 4 Dale Street in Portland. I work in Westbrook. And I guess, I'm not sure if I have a question or a couple of comments, or maybe they're questions. One is, thank you for that presentation, Janina. Oops, I'm sorry. Thank you for that presentation, Chief. But I have a question regarding the training. You listed out the training that folks have to have. And I know we've been trying to do some implicit bias training. And so I'm going to get back to a couple of the points that Councilor Berganja made, which is there a way to put into your policy that your offices will have some implicit bias training, maybe yearly? Because again, like Councilor Berganja said, there isn't the relationship between folks of color, especially within the Black community, and the police officers continues to be restrained. And so that was one question. The other question gets at the whole recommendation. I know that Portland has a citizen review board, and I'm not asking Westbrook to do that. I'm just wondering, in the process of going through the investigation, I'm wondering if there can be a community members on that, in that process. And I certainly understand confidentiality, and I'm just wondering if they can be part of that, like I say, part of that investigation with those officers, because that will also get at relationships. And then my last thing is that, like Councilor Regan just said, it was a supervisor who had George Floyd's neck, on his knee or the other way around. And so I'm concerned about retaliation. I know you probably have a policy regarding retaliation. I don't know if there's some training. Like, I've been in situations that I haven't said anything. I think people have to be very brave to say things. I can only imagine what would happen in a situation if you, as the chief, or if a supervisor was there, and their subordinate had to kind of take over in a situation where they felt that excessive force was being used. And so I'm not sure. I'm not sure just how comfortable somebody would be. And if I don't know what the training would be, but how you're going to make your officers comfortable in doing that. I've talked it up. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Chief.
Hi, Sue Salisbury, 134 Park Road, Westbrook. Just two things. Thanks very much, Chief Roberts, for your presentation. It was really helpful. One thing, and you may have mentioned it, but I think a lot of these policies and procedures come from like a national board or place, similar to like our school committee, where we get our policies and we kind of tailor them to what works in our community and our school community. I'm assuming that something similar happens from that, in that perspective. And the other thing, similar to what Regina was saying and what Councilor Rajande was saying, was training around implicit bias. I keep coming back to objectionably reasonable. And I think that I understand that phrase, but I wonder how much a person's own beliefs and their feelings and their life experience plays into that. And I wonder what training happens at a higher level when you go to the police academy, but also is there training that we can do locally that kind of helps people, first of all, acknowledge that they have those feelings and that background, and maybe their objectionably reasonable is different than mine. I don't know, and I wonder if there's a way to address those things.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chief. My name is Harrison. Do not live in Westbrook, but I work in Westbrook. I spend 80% of my time in Westbrook with friends, family, living in Westbrook. I just want to say thank you and your department for all the great work that you do. I do work closely with your department in trying to help citizens of Westbrook, so I do know the sacrifices and the work that goes into the job that the police officers in Westbrook do. I just had a couple of questions, and one of them is recruitment. You spoke about, more training. I think training is great. We all need training, but sometimes you can't train people. Some people are just not cut out for the job. So if you could just talk about, the process in recruiting people as far as coming to Westbrook, that would be great. And also, if you can just touch on the diversity of your department and some of the things that you do in trying to diversify the department, male to female ratio, minorities, and things like that. And my last question have to do with, I know there's been a lot of things going around about defunding police and things like that. I would like to get your take on it. But my thought when I hear defund the police, obviously we can't do that. I mean, that's impossible. You need the police. I just think what is sometimes missing in that conversation is trying to talk about the fact that police has taken on so much more than what, the job is, right? They're a mental health worker. They respond to all crises. Homelessness, they're responding because funding has been cut for a bunch of other services. So if you can just talk about, your thought around when you hear that and what are some of the, things that need to be done in order to make sure that you are supported in your role as far as, a department. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Chief. Thank you so much for the great job the police in Westbrook just do to, protect us. I do have a quick question regarding we're talking about training, and the training, I would like to ask if it's possible to have some combined training, or you can call that, the day just of training where you can combine community leaders and police officers. So to just be together and having a training and sharing some experiences between those community leaders and police officers that can just increase trust, and they can learn much more about some biases from the community, and the community can learn much more what some thoughts, from the police officers. That's my question.
All right, thank you. This time I was proactive and took notes. So, Ms. Phillips, I will try to start out with your questions. As you mentioned, the implicit bias training for officers as well as for co-city employees. We have a adjusted date for that first training. It's going to be October, I think, 22nd or 23rd. And that's not just for Westbrook officers. All of our Westbrook officers will attend it. However, that's for Cumberland and York County officers as well, all the agencies. Having a community member on the review process. I can't read my own scribble. With the investigation, that is a civilian review panel, and ultimately, whatever the city wants us to follow through with. You know me well enough to know that I'm going to be as transparent as I possibly can. At the same time, one of my strategic goals is to set the organization and the city up for success in future years. So what does that look like, and how do we do it with that balance, that reasonableness, which kind of comes back to Committee Member Salisbury, the objectively reasonable. It's not so much my objectively reasonable if I'm using force, sorry. It is the individuals that are reviewing that particular incident and that type of use of force, in their knowledge, their training, their experience with the totality of those circumstances the officer knew at the time the force was used, was that objectively reasonable? So it's not necessarily based on the individual's officer's actions, it's on the reviewing individuals. Ms. Phillips, you're concerned about retaliations. It's a human condition, absolutely. You know, having the courage to come forward, and what does that look like? And again, in my mind, I am approaching this particular piece of this evening with trying to answer your questions and getting your input as to what the future might look for the City of Westbrook, the Westbrook Police Department, and our community, with that balance of what can we accomplish and how do we do that? How do we make sure that we are better connected to our people of color, our minority community members? And as you know, in recent actually probably every conversation you and I have, that I always ask, how do we connect with the people that are truly disenfranchised and marginalized? We can meet with the business owners and property owners of people of color. We need those relationships too, and we struggle with trying to connect with those that have that not positive perspective of a police officer, let alone it's a Westbrook police officer or anybody else. So more work to do on that for sure. On the national standards, again, yes, I talked about best practices and then the required mandates, the mandates that come from the state level as well as the federal level, and the U.S. Supreme Court, and even the actual criminal laws. And just today, I gave our criminal code, our motor vehicle code, and the main law enforcement officers manual, which is literally more like 500 pages, to a candidate that I'm waiting for him to tell me what date he can start. And that goes to your question, Director Dia, on recruitment and what our department looks like. Currently, just this morning, we swore in 2 new officers, a young man and a young woman. That brings our staffing, actually making a paycheck, to 41. And of those 41, Officer Durgan, who is Maya Durgan, I believe is the 6th female officer. We have 1 Portuguese male officer, and the gentleman that I was speaking to today is out of Ali Sabri. He's out of New York City. He works for the New York Traffic Authority. He's not a police officer. He'll have to go to the academy. However, he is from Sri Lanka. He speaks 5 languages, including Arabic. And he's very excited to be joining us as soon as he can get himself situated from New York here into the greater Westbrook area. We currently have, when I'm able to swear him in, hopefully the end of August, 1st of September, the 2 officers this morning, and Officer Zipporah Velasco will be going to the academy when the Board of Trustees determines when it's safe to start the next police academy, the basic law enforcement training program, and what that looks like. We wait every Friday for the Public Safety Commissioner's briefing to hopefully get an answer on that. And we continue to recruit. The challenge that I see is, first of all, just our society right now. Not a lot of people are running to become police officers. At the same time, there's a different dynamic, and some people that have lost their jobs in other professions may be looking at more of a consistent job, working with benefits from the city. We have always struggled with connecting with our minority community members, not just in the greater Westbrook area. We send officers out to schools across New England to recruit from their criminal justice programs, or maybe it might be just a general job fair. Officer Colby Clark is somebody that we actually recruited from the western side of Massachusetts, and he has really stepped up our recruitment game in talking to a lot of the officers that are looking at Westbrook that are lateral transfers, as well as new candidates. I will absolutely take tonight's conversation and future conversations, suggestions, ideas are how we can connect with men and women that are of the age range and the character and the ability to develop the competence to be public servants as police officers here in our city of Westbrook. With anything I want to partner with you on, but certainly that is it as well. Coming back to school board members, Salisbury's question around the training and objectively reasonable. The academy does have certainly basic training in that 18 weeks that the what we call cadets are going through, and every 2 years, actually every year, officers are required to go through mandated training, and that's driven again by the Board of Trustees. We here in the city of Westbrook do, between what we do internally that's driven by our culture internally in training and what we do for career development and officers' discretionary training, I would say on average every officer gets 4 to 5 times more training than the basic is required. And most of that is driven by their career choices and their interests. At the same time, that in-house training that we do is driven by the community, the conversations that I have with you, with other community members, with my staff. If you come into my office and all the various pieces of paper, there's 2 quarter pieces of paper that are taped to the stand on my computer desk, and it's handwritten notes of what type of training I'm waiting to try to get into for the officers, whether it's an hour-long session or it's a half-a-day session or it's a full-day session. And ones are crossed off because, hey, we got to that. And trying to pull all of those pieces together. I'll continue to do that. And the last gentleman that spoke in regards to the combined training and sharing of experiences, we have held twice, if not 3 times since I've been here, a community policing academy. We've done it for our Iraqi community members. We did one for just a general adult population, and for I think 3 summers in a row, we actually had one where a school resource officer, Jim Fahrenkoff, did one for our youth. And they're typically, for the adult sessions, they're usually 10 weeks long, 3 hours a night, once a week. I think I get that, roughly 30 hours. And it really goes over the different things that officers are required to do, some classroom, some hands-on, some like scenario type of based training. And we could certainly, that's just one variation. We could do a lot of different things in regards to training, like Councilor Chow had mentioned, what Captain Lally had sent out to our elected officials to see if you had some time to get on and do that online training. I think that, like anything, the more we share information, the better educated we are, the better relationships we have, and the better we can find the strong way we're going forward now, continuing that way. Is there any questions that I missed? Next.
Does anyone from the council wish to speak? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I just might also add to the chief's recruitment efforts as she updates us on a regular basis. The previous councils in years past have approved recruitment monies available to assist and help with recruitment efforts, which the chief uses very wisely and appropriately in an effort to help get lateral transfers and qualified law enforcement officers that can immediately get to work serving the community. But as being updated on a regular basis of candidates and hoping us to get fully staffed and an effort to add additional positions through some grants that we are seeking, the chief has a lot of candidates that may be very well qualified that get passed over because they don't resemble the core values of the department and they don't pass all the qualifications for the job here in Westbrook. And so the chief and her department's process does a thorough review of candidates to make sure that they meet the core values of department and have the integrity to serve our community. So the efforts to not just get a warm body to fill a position, which in some cases might happen in other parts of the country, that's not happening here, and the process is very thorough, and the chief does an outstanding job with her staff to go through that process. We also have the Public Safety Commission, which is a citizen body. Thank you to a couple of members are here today, and they help with the hiring process. It's kind of like a civil service board. They help with the hiring process. So you have community members who are interviewing and discussing things with these candidates in this process. So they have a very involved process. And to that point, we do have a couple of open positions on that Public Safety Commission that we've been a little bit delayed in trying to fill due to COVID and the many things going on. So if anyone is interested, we're looking to diversify the board. We do have a couple positions there, geographic specific to the community. Definitely reach out to Chief Roberts or Chief Turcott from the fire department, and we can definitely outline that process and let you know what that commitment is. It's a very involved and responsible board. A lot of the work they do is behind the scenes and not in a public setting like this, and we really appreciate the work that they do, and they do meet quite often. And so if someone is interested in serving in that, please let us know. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Actually, Mr. Mayor, thank you for saying that, because you reminded me I actually did not answer your question directed to you in regards to what is our selection process. I talked about recruitment and talked about selection process. So as the mayor mentioned, we work with the public safety commissioners for initial interview. The commissioners vote that individual candidate forward, immediately go into a background investigation process. So it's a lengthy packet, probably 20, 25 pages long. And that is handed off to one of our detectives that does the initial background investigation. Just literally this week, actually earlier today, I sent out an update to my staff on where we are in the hiring process. And as recently as this morning, I took a candidate out of the process because he, at least in appearance, the information that I have was not forthright with the situation he was involved in less than a year ago. So the background investigation, the time and the effort that our detectives are putting in to research and to interview not only the candidate, but the people they're listing as references and their family members, their neighbors, their former employers, does make a difference. We do the polygraph examination process. We have an in-house polygraph examiner and Detective Dan Violette, who's extremely experienced and very professional. Actually, as a young rookie chief, I learned the term incremental disclosure from Detective Violette. And I would summarize that as to say that in our interview, we had a question saying, is there anything in your past, in your background, that might be an embarrassment to the city of Westbrook, the Westbrook Police Department, whether it was a crime that you committed, didn't get caught or not? And many times people will say, well, no, or maybe I used this particular drug, or I stole something, or some type of minor criminal offense. And that's what they tell us in the interview, and then they get to the background packet and they fill in a little more detail. And then they get to the background investigation, they say, well, actually, there's a little more here. And then they get to talking with Detective Violette. And before the detective actually even connects them up to the instrument to test their truthfulness, he's asking the same questions, and they give a little more. So incremental disclosure, that is a red flag that should I hire somebody like that, I am likely going to not get the truth when I ask them for the truth the first time. So really, I rely on the men and women that you have hired before I came on, and I've been lucky enough to hire, and use their skills and their character and their competence to build the best police department for you. As much as in the message that I put out today, we got officers working overtime, and we're running on minimum staffing because we have these open positions. And I'm not going to hire somebody that I don't think has got the right character. They're going to be mad at me if I do it anyway. And I'm not, to me, this is one of the sacred responsibilities that I have as your police chief, is to make sure that they're using the mechanisms and the resources available to pick the best people. Wrapping up that selection process, we have a psychological evaluation that is done by a psychologist local in Scarborough. Since I came on, we've had a strong relationship with her. Actually, Captain Goldberg is the key representative for the department through that hiring process. Once I tell them that they're past the interview, I hand them immediately over to Captain Goldberg, and he works them through the rest of the steps. We also have the physical agility that they have to pass at the department and the academy standards, and the medical to make sure that they are physically able to enter into the academy or as a lateral transfer. And ultimately, when all of that is done, like it happened this morning, I get to give a call, or this time I got to talk to the gentleman face to face because he happened to be still in town, to say, I want to make you a final job offer. And even then, we have a year-long probationary period. And the officers, when they come out of the academy, or if they come off, if they're a lateral transfer, they go through a shorter training version, usually anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks, depending on if they're familiar with our computer system and our laws and things. And then one of the sergeants is responsible, so 3 times a year, pretty much every 4 months, they're required to do an evaluation on that particular employee with specific details and notes as to how the employee is performing and behaving. And in my quick memory, I can think of at least 3 officers that did not make their probation because either a character or competence dynamic. The character, tough to change, competence, we're going to work with you until we get to the point that what I'm receiving for that information from the men and women that are on the front lines working with these individuals is telling me that the investment is really not there.
Thank you. Councilor Ganji?
Thank you, Chair Moss, and thank you, Chief Robert, again for a wonderful presentation. I just want to make a comment, not a question, that the country is in a turning point. This is not about Westbrook, and I don't think we have seen anything in Westbrook that prompted us to have this dialogue or conversation. It's a nationwide situation that everybody has to deal with. So I just want to say, for the record, that really Chief Robert has done a great job, and you have opened your doors for all of us whenever we come with the questions. You host us in your office to discuss and have a dialogue. But again, there is bad apples that have made the whole country to be in a situation where we are. Because of that, I will welcome all of us, whether black, brown, white, to really feel the pain that those victims are going through and to accept to have a dialogue, whether it's a dialogue that you feel comfortable or uncomfortable. Just make yourself in the shoes of the victims and say, how can we do this better? I've been here 24 years. I never seen really a movement like what I have seen, like Black Lives Matter or all those people are supporting. I think we can use the opportunity that we have to revisit all these policies that we have been discussing, but also more important, to build a relationship with our police. I'm not a fan of defending the police, but my question is, how can we build really a trust between us so that I don't fear when I go out or in my neighborhood, because most of the victims have been because of not necessarily the police, but people who call the police and say, here, it's somebody who's doing something. So we need to be able to talk on citywide, statewide, nationwide, to make every stakeholder comfortable to talk about these issues. So again, the training are good, but we still have bad apples that will create some bad issues, bad precedent that creates the chaos that we have seen in the country. So again, thank you for your dedication, for your leadership, for your hard work, for your commitment to the city, and we hope that all of us will continue to work together to address issues with all the recommendations we gave you, and we continue to provide. Hopefully that we can come up with a process that makes everybody feel comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Shaughnessy.
Yeah, I would just like to say that, again, thank you very much for this, for being as open and receptive as you've been. And it's not at all about this particular department or anything, but it comes to mind that at certain points in history, there are certain professions that evolve. And I'm an artist. Art has evolved constantly. And this is a time when I think we look at a lot of our professions, and the police are one of them, that are at a point of evolution. And I appreciate, I am very proud of this department, as I spoke before about the community policing, the connection to the community that we have. I think that is amazing, and I think we could be something that sets a standard. And in some ways, I think we are doing that. And so this is a, you know, I've been around for many years, probably older than a lot of everybody here, and have seen these kind of points of evolution. I think we're at one, and it's both challenging, it could be frightening, but it could be very exciting as well. And I appreciate very much what Councilor Ranja has said, what the members here that came up and spoke said, and I think there's a lot of possibility in this, and thank you for your leadership on it.
Thank you. I had one question. So I understood from what you said that you're gonna, from here, work on the policy some more, maybe incorporate some of the feedback that you've heard here and that you may hear from other places. When you do that, can you, when you email them to us, just highlight, you know, if there were any things from this evening that you ended up incorporating into any edits after today?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
As far as the internal process, as I described, kind of tweaking what take away from here. Actually, tomorrow morning I'll be meeting with the captains and Lieutenant Thompson on a variety of different topics, but the policy being one. We have a department-wide meeting that's going to be held on Tuesday, August 4th. And that particular meeting is going to have a variety of things on the agenda. One of them is talking about not just this policy, but the whole strategic plan on policies. Because I want to make sure the officers are trained and are comfortable and know and can retain the policy, it will not go into effect until sometime in September when I'm able to put everybody through that training. So in the next month and a half or so, I'll be working with the captains and our officers that do a lot of the instructing on the different pieces of uses of force to figure out what that curriculum looks like. And whatever that final version of the policy is, I will gladly share it with you and the public that this is what we're now operating on, effective whatever date that becomes.
Vice President Turcotte.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. One of the things that stood out for me as I was listening is how important the review process of complaints is in whether or not it's a supervisory position, you know, and having an officer interfering and excessive force. And there are cases across this country where officers were let go for interfering and for standing up for what was right. So I think in those cases, it's much more valuable to have outside insight, whether it's the mayor and administration reviewing those and doing, you know, keeping the privacy issue taken care of in that regard, whether including members of the community in some sort of a committee that's sworn to secrecy. But I think that way you're also protecting officers that would, and I don't anticipate that to be an issue in Westbrook, but if we are setting the standard for the rest of the country, as we should be, that should definitely be something administration should be exploring. In my line of work, complaints are escalated to the board of directors if they have any regulatory compliance issues. I think this warrants that. It cannot be isolated, so thank you.
If there are no further comments, I think a motion to adjourn may be in order. Second? Second by Councilor Turcotte. All in favor? Any opposed? We are adjourned.
Thank you all very much. Thank you as well.